tell you, hopefully, in 15 minutes, a little bit about my life story, so strap in. It was a Saturday in March 2001. I was 9 years old, and it was the morning of my first horse riding lesson. I had nagged and nagged and nagged my parents to learn, and after many resistant conversations, they finally caved and booked me a lesson. This morning, however, I couldn't get up from the sofa, let alone get on a horse. I was thin, tired, thirsty, and constantly needing the toilet. And I was diagnosed that day at the University Hospital of Wales with type 1 diabetes. I stayed in hospital until the Monday, when a diabetes nurse was available to explain our new lives to us all. I don't remember much about my diagnosis. I don't remember ever crying about it. I don't remember feeling sad during the new hours of new information so lovingly delivered by my nurse, Corinna. I do remember feeling so relieved when I got to go home and had started to feel better. I remember looking down at my arms in the bath and being amazed that they seemed to have gained weight after just a few days of taking insulin. I had an energy again that I didn't know I had lost, and I relished the praise I was receiving for eating copious amounts of jacket potatoes and gaining weight. Soon enough, Easter came around, and in place of the usual Easter egg, I asked for a bright yellow space hopper and a new CD. I spent hours on that space hopper, bouncing to Shaggy's It Wasn't Me. I couldn't hit the ground hard enough. But looking back now with an adult's emotional understanding, I think I was angry. Angry about a very sudden and intense attention. Angry about the general worry and heightened anxiety which now surrounded me. And angry about a future which now stretched out ahead of me with so many constraints, tasks, and stipulations. I can only imagine the terror my mum, dad, and sister must have felt. My family are very good at being anxious. I always say that in the animal kingdom, we would be the family of meerkats. So I always say, so you can imagine the adrenaline we all pumped at that time. My mother slept by my bed for months after my diagnosis, worried that I would fall into hypoglycemia in my sleep. My father mediated many standoffs whilst I struggled to gain any control within my new regime. And my sister felt totally abandoned as she dealt with her own worries about her sister. It was a traumatic time, one that we still feel the effects of in our relationships today. But we got through it as a family, determined that life would go on as normal as possible. My school presented another challenge. Unfortunately, the duty of care laws that exist today were not in place, and my head teacher deemed my diabetes wholly my parents' responsibility. My mum parked her own career so that she was able to visit the school twice a day to test my blood sugar, and she accompanied me on every school trip so that I wouldn't miss out. I will forever be grateful that my nurse, Corinna, called my head teacher several times to persuade her to let her come into school and speak to my class about my diagnosis. My head teacher deemed it an inappropriate topic and not something to worry the others in my class with. But Corinna persisted and eventually spent an hour destigmatizing my new condition in a way that I wasn't able to do for myself. She demonstrated the power of honesty and transparency with my peers and gave me the confidence to educate others about diabetes when my initial instinct was to hide it away. 2 years after my diagnosis, my mum heard about a brand new way of delivering insulin, an insulin pump. It was a totally new way of treating diabetes. It gave hope of flexibility and freedom from strict meals and the copious amount of carbs I was having to consume. And as far as my mother was concerned, I was having it. Unfortunately, funding had still not been quite decided for this new therapy. There were no nice guidelines in place yet, But after a few tense conversations with my clinic and a lot of encouragement from my nurses, my parents had bought me the pump and my hospital had agreed to fund my consumables. I loved my new pump. It gave me confidence and a feeling of capability in life that I had lost over the last couple of years. It meant I could eat what I wanted, when I wanted. But more than that, it meant that I had some control. And I believe it was this control that saved me throughout my teenage years. In high school, my diabetes went on the back burner. Studying at the biggest comprehensive school in Wales and juggling exams, hormones, homework, and the scrutiny of my peers occupied every inch of my brain. I definitely didn't give diabetes the attention I do today. I would test my blood sugars only a couple of times a day, guesstimate carb boluses, and hope for the best. And somehow I got away with it. I can, of course, acknowledge that it probably was not the best move for my health, but I don't regret it. At that time, that was the best I could do. There was a lot of misunderstanding around my condition in school from pupils and teachers, and between a condition which required all the attention I had to give and every other aspect of my life won. There are still days today when I feel like I have to make this choice, and I ask myself, will this be a life day or a good control day? And often at an audition or on set, life still wins. However, I have never turned away from my health as much as I did in high school. I don't think I properly processed my diagnosis whilst I was growing up. It was as though my body had carried the experience for me until my mind had the space and maturity to unpick it, and it kind of felt like I was in a sort of survival mode. The only place where the cracks were beginning to show was clinic. I had since moved to adult clinic, which was a much more stark experience. From the moment I stepped into the building, it was a game of don't cry. I attended on my own, which enabled me to make sure my appointments were as short as possible. And even though my doctors were kind and generally very happy with my control, the immediate rush of helplessness, vulnerability, and anger was totally overwhelming. With a lump on in my throat, and my life in graphs on the computer screen, I would attempt to answer simple yet seemingly impossible questions such as, what number do you tend to run at? What do you eat for lunch? Or what were you doing last Wednesday afternoon? And no matter how good my HbA1c was, I always left feeling like anything I did would never be enough, that there was always more I could be doing, basals I could be tweaking, things I could be preempting, using more temporary basals, dual wave, square wave, pre-boluses. No matter how hard I worked, it would never be enough because it's impossible to function like an organ. With every slightly raised blood sugar, the feeling of failure grew, and with every hypo, my confidence shrank. By the time I was in sixth form, I was really struggling, but I didn't want to admit it to anyone, not even myself. I think this is because it felt like there was nowhere to go afterwards. It seemed a bit pointless. The routine that was exhausting me had to continue. I had no other option. You can't take a break from a condition that needs constant surveillance. And I found it really hard to disassociate my blood sugar levels with my sense of worth. But as far as the people around me were concerned, I was doing really well. I was very busy with dance classes several times a week. I attended a drama class. I landed the occasional acting job and was doing well at school whilst holding down a good HbA1c. Eventually, I left school and fell fully into the world of work. In the summer of 2012, I was cast in a new TV show called Vikings. It was shooting in the Wicklow Mountains, just outside of Dublin. And for the first time in my life, I was going to be spending months away from home. In the run-up to the shoot, I experienced daily panic attacks. Unable to eat, I lost weight and couldn't sleep. Despite the fact that this was something I had always dreamt of, I had an innate belief that I was not capable of keeping myself alive on my own, despite the fact that I had a 100% success rate so far. This irrational fear overtook everything I wanted or loved in my life. And as my parents drove me to the airport for my first flight to Dublin, we agreed that they would get me through this contract, and after I would give it all up. Over the next 2 months, I was forced to look my anxieties in the face. And thankfully, with the most wonderful cast and crew, I had the most wonderful experience, which persuaded me to keep going. I kept working. I moved to London. I even got cast in the first ad for Freestyle Libre and began using the sensor myself. So fast forward a few years to 2019, and I've moved to Chiswick, West London. I was sat in a coffee shop and overheard two ladies talking about HbA1cs. So pumped with new neighbourhood confidence, I interrupted and joined them for a coffee. They told me they were both looping, using a system called Android APS, something I had never heard of. It was a mind-blowing afternoon. They explained to me that there was a community of loopers all over the world that have set up their own system using a set of instructions left online and supporting each other via a Facebook group. They showed me the apps that they'd built, which to me looked more like the stock market than a blood sugar monitor. But they assured me that with a Dana pump and an attachment for my Freestyle Libre, I could do it too. As luck would have it, my pump warranty was up, and I managed to persuade my hospital to get me a Dana. And with a lot of help from a phenomenal online community, by June last year, I was looping. Looping still feels like nothing short of a miracle. The first time I set up my app, which I now lovingly call Baggins, tears streamed down my face as I watched the burden I never dared speak about be taken from my shoulders. The effect on me has been profound. My confidence has never been so high. I have never had such energy. My quality of sleep has improved, and I am daring to do things, both in my personal and professional life, that I never thought possible. Looping still requires a lot of hard work and attention, but for the first time in my life, I'm allowed to forget about my diabetes. Only every so often, and for a couple of hours at a time. But I wake up every morning knowing that I can choose a life day and still have good control. In many ways, I feel very lucky. I know how privileged I am to have the background I do, to have a family who would fight to the death for me to have the latest tech, to have a nurse batter down the door of my primary school so that my peers could understand what I was going through, to have a national healthcare system that is stable and able to provide me with what I need, to have found the control I so desperately wanted as a child via the technology that I now use, and not within food or insulin restriction, as so many of my friends do. And to stumble across an online community who have helped make the impossible possible. Throughout my version of the diabetes journey, pretty much everything that could have gone right went right. And so I feel particularly privileged to be able to talk here today. It is so heartening to see so many healthcare professionals who are constantly striving to improve the quality of care and quality of life of people living with diabetes. And I'm sure that with the great work that you're doing, things can only get better. So thank you very much.